Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Franchise Show. I hope you're all doing well. This is the show, and I'm going to do it where we get under the hat of some of the most important topics in franchising. And it's a live show. Well, it's live if it's April 1st, and I'm not kidding today. April 1st, somewhere around 5:15 for about 45 or 50 minutes, 12:15 if you're in America. And what do? We take a different subject each week that is interesting and relevant to the industry of franchising. And we have a lovely guest, and this week is no exception to that. We have a fantastic guest. So we love you to get involved in this. It's live for a reason, so that if you are here, you can direct the conversation. You are the producers and the directors of this show. So if you've got a comment, if you're here, pop it in the comments. We will bring it up on screen and we will discuss it as we get into today's subject. And today's subject is the CV dead? Or for our American friends, is the resume dead? And it's going to be an interesting one to get into because CVs are used both in the recruitment of our teams and our people, and to a degree, they are used when we are recruiting franchisees. So we have the lovely Nick Pleven to talk about this subject. Nick, welcome back to the Franchise Show.
Thank you, Harvey. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Perhaps we could start off just with a little introduction. Most people will know you, Nick, but give a little introduction to yourself and what eTalent is all about, and then we'll get into things today.
Okay, so eTalent is both a software as a service platform for recruitment and also is a flat fee service for recruiting staff, where we do anything from giving you access to the platform to do it yourself, or we do the full managed recruitment right up until when you decide to interview the final candidates and who to recruit. As I said, as you see on the screen there, we make recruitment simple, and I think we offer 4 times as much as a recruitment agency for a quarter of the cost, which seems a really good deal. So that's what we do.
Fantastic. No, I love that. What we're talking about today, so we're talking about CVs, we're talking about resumes. And when we say, is it dead? What do we mean by that? I mean, we've talked about this subject a fair bit, Nick, and, you know, I tend to agree that the CV or that way of gathering information has had its day. You know, is it over for the CV? You know, can we start to use it in a different way? What's your take on a CV as it stands today?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's dead. I think in the way it's being used, it's really no longer fit for purpose, especially with AI on the increase in the number in virtually every field. And I think it's certainly something that you can use to guide the conversation once you've decided a person is potentially suitable for a role. But to use it right at the beginning of a process where most of them are being used in what's known as CV sifting, I think it's certainly not suitable for that. And there are far better ways of coming up with a shortlist than the CV. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we'll touch on a number of reasons why that's the case.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've got to get into AI in this conversation and how that's used with CVs, because I think it's really relevant why it's becoming outdated. I did like what you said there about guiding the conversation with a CV, you know, because, you know, a CV it tells somebody about that passage of time, about their life. Is it course of life it means in Latin? I think I can't remember now. I'm showing off, aren't I? But it's exactly that. It's trying to describe what you've done. If you've done that CV correctly and you have told the truth in it, it can serve as great guidance. But like you said, Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say some people do tell the truth in them. Yes.
Occasionally it does. It's rare, but it does happen. Before we continue, let's welcome a couple of people who've joined us here live. We have, of course, the ever wise Simon Wise. Always good to have Simon with us. He's put hello, franchise friends. I'm sure Simon will have lots to say about the CV. Simon is, of course, a recruiter in our wonderful industry, so it'll be fascinating to see Simon's experience of CVs, you know, when and how they are useful, when and how they should be used, and if their time is up. But we will get into that as we go on today. And let's also welcome Darren to the show. Darren, always good to see you. He's put good day here for a short visit. Have a meeting in 10 minutes. Well, it's always great to have you with us whenever you can be with us. Please get involved. Let me know your thoughts, Darren, on CVs. You know, maybe everyone, I think, has had an experience of a CV. You know, everyone can relate to trying to write one. Everyone can relate, perhaps, sometimes to reading one, but certainly trying to write one. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to get across who you are to somebody else without being in front of them. You know, and I think we all know as well that communication is so much about tone of voice. It's so much about body language, you know, and something as static as a CV, it's quite hard for all of your characteristics and your soft skills to come across in that sort of bland piece of paper. Oh, let's have a look. Darren has made a comment, so let's get straight into it. So Darren's put, I think it's even more important to keep it updated in places where people can find it. LinkedIn, webpage, socials, everything that has your name, brand is part of your CV. Be up to date. This is a really interesting one because this is really sort of taking a different stance on what a CV is and how it should be used. And of course, that's exactly what we're trying to do today. You know, a CV, or a course of life, as I'm going to call it now, is valid if it's used correctly at the right time. You know, Nick said there about guiding a conversation. You know, what's your thought on how you use it, and should you use it on your web pages, your socials and things?
Well, I think we're sort of a danger of missing the point here. A CV is fine once you think this person is likely to be suitable, but it's being used far too early in the process, and it's being used to screen out people and screen people into a shortlist, and that's where I think it mainly falls down. Of course, it was more relevant in the 70s. I remember typing my first CV and applying for a job and having to type it many times and so on and sending out. And in those cases, it was fine because the employer was likely to only get 10 CVs or something like that. But these days, when you've got hundreds of people applying for a role, the CV is being used, I think, totally incorrectly by potentially using AI to sift through the CVs in the background and determine who should be taken forward or not. And the reason that's particularly ridiculous, because as I think we've discussed before, Harvey, you've now got AI that's able to write somebody's CV. It's very easy to do. You go online, say, write my CV, and off it does. And then you've got applicant tracking or recruitment software systems that use AI to read CVs that are written by AI. And I think everyone would agree that's a little bit absurd. So there really ought to be another process whereby we can identify those people that are most suitable for a role and then delve into their CVs and find out more about them at that point, rather than do it on 200 people. So that's my main beef with CVs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that they are not valid. It's where you use them and when you use them. And I completely get it. You know, if you're using it too early, then you may be missing. We're going to talk today about not only using, not only CVs and how we recruit people well, but also how we recruit franchisees well. And you make a really interesting point. It sifts out people too early. And now, I think this comes from trying to save a bit of time. If you are a people director in a company, a recruiter, and you've got a lot of information coming to you in the form of CVs, because that's currently what people are doing, and you're wanting to sift through it, you're trying to find ways to do it quicker, and you shouldn't. We're getting this wrong. How should this be changed? If we can try and get to a position where CVs don't come into play until, like you say, a little bit later on, where they're guiding a conversation, they're a reference point once you've discovered someone's soft skills. How does somebody apply or present themselves without a
Well,
CV?
no, they can certainly attach a CV. It's just from the recruiter's side, don't look at it until you've decided whether a person is suitable. Now, this is going to be obviously a little plug for me, because I built my business on trying to avoid the CV, and I've built my business on some research that was done by Manchester Business School that looked at how predictive various criteria were in determining somebody's success in a role. How predictive is it? And the CV didn't come out terribly well. The CV came out very poorly, because education, past experience is just not predictive of future performance. And if you think about it, it does make quite a bit of sense, because most companies do things in their own particular way, and a role in one company, call it the marketing manager, may be completely different from the same marketing manager role in a different company where they do different things. So looking at hard skills in past hard skills and applying them for future, it doesn't seem to work. However, that particular piece of research discovered that actually, if you looked at soft skills, personality, and apply that to the specific requirements of the role, is far more predictive in future performance. And that's what I've built my business on for the last 15 years. And it certainly works. When you look at the clients we've been working on for the last 10 years, it's working very well. So I would look at soft skills rather than the CV. Of course, the other beauty of that is that they have to prove their soft skills through an assessment as part of the process. So AI is far less likely to be able to interfere in that process.
I think it's really valid points, and when it's very costly to take on an employee, and it's costly to replace an employee, and it's very costly to engage with the wrong franchisee and try and replace that franchisee, right? So these are decisions that have to be made very, very carefully. And like you said, those hard skills, those past hard skills that are put on there, it's rarely those things that cause a relationship in a job to end. It's much more likely to be a sort of a cultural fit, or a situation that happens and how that person reacts. Are they getting angry? Are they calm? It's much more likely to be those soft skills, those personal skills.
Absolutely. And in fact, they can be used, as you said, in two ways. One is whether they'll be able to carry out that specific role. Do they have the soft skills for that specific role? For example, diplomacy or sociability or accommodation to others. Those are sort of very specific personality characteristics, and you can match them to a particular role. And with an accountant, for example, it would be detail orientation. It would be following a process. It would be accountability, that sort of thing. Those are particularly important for specific roles. But then there's also the other side that you mentioned there is, okay, so the person's got the soft skills, but will they fit in that particular environment? Will they fit into that team? Will they get on with the other members of the team? Will I, as a manager, do I have the right skills to manage that person, knowing the sort of preferences they have? Or will it just be, a mismatch? So there's more than one element that one can look at in terms of someone's soft skills and behavior. to determine whether they'll be fit for a role or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important as well to consider that from the other side, not just from that person fitting in, but from the manager's side of, or the line manager or the owner or the franchisor. You know, are they going to be able to manage them well? I think is a big question in franchising, actually. You know, trying to find, and I think it's even more appropriate when you're trying to find a franchisee, actually, because you're trying to find somebody who's got a really unique set of characteristics and soft skills, really. You know, somebody who can understand the value of a system, but effectively someone who will follow that system. You know, it's a bit like when you're in the army. You can do your absolute best, be creative, but you're within a very strict system and very strict hierarchy. But there's only certain types of people that do well in that. If you're the type of person that, like me, questions everything and is curious about everything, it wouldn't work in a situation where there has to be a chain of command, decisions have to be made quickly, that has to go down the line quickly. And these sorts of things are harder to find out at the beginning. And I suppose a good question is, what type of questions do we need to be asking our potential employees? Let's take employees, because we're on those at the moment. So when we're at the beginning part of this process and we've got all these CVs coming in, and we're trying to do something different with them. We're not using that software to read those CVs. We're not just quickly scanning them. What are the types of questions? Are there some particular sort of areas you mentioned there about an accountant having obviously a very different set of characteristics and soft skills to, for instance, a salesperson? Is that what your software does? Does it can you create a sort of avatar of characteristics and soft skills that applies to a particular role?
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought of the avatar, but essentially what we have is we've had about 40 personality characteristics, and we mix and match those according to the role, so that you only assess those things that are going to be critical for success in that role and not nice to haves. So the way I usually describe that is, most people like people to be friendly. But if you're looking for a maintenance engineer that's going to be working 95% of their time with machines, with things, the fact that they're not friendly isn't going to be a deal breaker. In fact, finding someone that is friendly and do that might be actually a bit harder anyway, but it's totally irrelevant. So only focus on those things that are critical for that role. And if you do it that way, then you have a much easier decision-making process, because you know that the characteristics that you've deemed important for that role, this person has in spades, and nothing else, because the others aren't important. He may be friendly as well, but we just don't need to know that. So we tend to work with our clients and look at the roles they're recruiting for and put together what we call a job type based on the specific personality characteristics that are important.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because particularly the friendly part of this that you mentioned, right? Because most good, kind people, when they're looking for somebody to work for them, I imagine it's natural for them to want to sort of mirror the type of person they are, right? They just want those types of people in their organization. They go on their gut feel, didn't get a good vibe from that person. But you're absolutely right. If that was a customer-centric role, a barista or a carer or something like that,
then for that,
it's vital. It's critical for success. Exactly as you said there. But it's really interesting to me that if somebody comes across as not very friendly at all, right? But they've got all of the other soft skills necessary. That I'm going to try and name some for this particular role. Maybe it's somebody who does sort of computers or something like that in the back of house the whole time, and they're in amongst the wires trying to fix all this stuff. they don't necessarily, like you say, need that.
No.
They need that attention to detail, and they need that determination, perhaps, to to problem solving, all these sorts of things. But if they give you a terrible glare when they're turning it off and on again, then it might not be the worst thing in the world. You'll get your computer fixed.
Absolutely. No, it's important to get that right, and that's often quite hard because I've actually got a pack of cards that I give to clients and say, okay, they're all the personality characteristics we can assess. Now, can you pick 10? And I come back 10 minutes later and they've got 35 cards out on the table. And I say, well, which ones do you have? Oh, we'd like all of these. And you have to get them to come down to 10 because or roughly 10. Because it's just not realistic for an individual to have all of those personality characteristics. And in fact, all of them will not be relevant. So getting that right is quite important.
That's a really interesting exercise as well. I think so many people, and I'm absolutely one of these people that's guilty of focusing on too many things in one go, right? And, to try and focus people down, and when they are trying to build up that job type or that avatar or whatever we're going to call that, when they're trying to build what that looks like, what that set of skills looks like, it's like you say, it's really important not to have so many skills that gets rid of a potential person too early in that process, and they could have been a really interesting individual and really quite suitable for a role. So yeah, that's a great idea to have that pack of cards. I mean, I think when people are watching this, they're listening to new ways of trying to improve the recruitment process.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy process in any sense of the word for franchisees, franchisors, employees, employers. It can be stressful, it can be costly, and we've got to look at ways of making it a smoother process. We've got to look at ways, you hear of candidates just not hearing anything, or rejection letter after rejection letter. Right. And it's so hard for those people that are out there trying to look for a job, and I know we've spoken before about using the software to try and not just for an employer to try and identify what characteristics suit this job role, and then who are the people that are coming to us match those characteristics. Let's look at it the other way around now. Let's look at it from the employee's point of view. We were talking earlier about an employee being able to use an element of the software to identify where their soft skills are, which ones they are, which ones they're excelling in, and which ones they enjoy. Because if you have a number of soft skills that you like, and then you match them into roles where those soft skills thrive, you'll enjoy your job more.
Oh, well, yes, and that's one of the things I often say to people, that if they use a process like ours, then they will almost invariably cut their staff turnover quite dramatically, and it takes a bit of understanding. But if you think that the role that you're going into every day involves what you enjoy doing, for example, a carer for somebody with Alzheimer's, let's say they really like people, they're very, very sociable, they're very accommodating, they have a lot of empathy, then going to do that role every day is going to push all their buttons. They're going to absolutely love it. It's what they get up for, and they think, who can I help today? And they won't want to leave. And not only that, but they'll perform so well, you won't ever want to fire them. And the only way you can do that is by matching those natural soft skills and natural personality traits to the role that they're applying for. And it's not just carers. I picked one there, but obviously empathy is an obvious one that so often missing in nursing today. But it works just as well in baristas. You know, they've got to be sociable, they've got to be outgoing, because they're going to be dealing with somebody, you know, with people all day long. So there's no good getting somebody there who's a grumpy bugger who doesn't want to deal with people. I mean, it just wouldn't work, would it? You may make a fantastic cup of coffee, but all the customers will go next door because they want to deal with him. So that's so important, and none of that's on the CV. So, you know, why are we
lost, isn't it? It's been lost before it's been found. Let's just quickly jump onto the comments here. I know Darren had to go, but let's read out his comment. He's put, agree 100%, need to look at all of them, not just the sorting hat, software AI. I like the analogy there, Darren. Let's have a little look. We're great. We've got a comment here from Mara from Italy. Great to have you with us, Mara. Been a former guest on the show. Mara's put, I'm thinking about my CV. Is a one-page CV despite 30 years as a freelance. Probably the AI will ban me. It's interesting, isn't it? Because again, what we're talking about here is trying to identify what your soft skills are. But there's two things. If you identified really what they were and made a great thing of what those soft skills were on your CV, that's one side of it. The other side of it is you've got to then have an employer that has the mechanisms in place to find those and to value those.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a long road ahead, probably, but we are starting to make some inroads into it. But
I'm determined to make a difference in the recruitment space, because I just think the way we're going is really very disappointing. I was at a conference about 6 months ago in Edinburgh of talent source, resources, and in the 3 hours I was there, I don't think anybody ever said the word personality or behavior or soft skills. They were all talking about, the hard stuff. How do we get 450 applicants down to 10, and just missing the point, as far as I'm concerned anyway.
I think so. Maybe the way to do it for potential employees that are looking for a new role is they can get those soft skills identified and to sort of bring those into it slowly, kind of combining them together a little bit at the beginning, so that as the other side of things start hopefully to evolve into a new way, they can still get noticed. It's a really tricky one. One thing I will say, because it's really made me think about something here, when we're saying about these soft skills. I once read, I think I read a post, or I was talking to somebody, and they had this new startup company. They had some money. They were getting a team of people together, and they were creating job roles. But the way they were creating the job roles was really interesting, and I think resonates with this conversation. So rather than saying, okay, we need a head of marketing, we need a salesperson, we need an accountant, etc., etc., these predetermined job roles that have been quite historic. What they were doing is they were breaking down what they did as a company into a series of tasks, first of all. Okay. Then they were taking those tasks and they were seeing what those tasks were about. And they were trying to identify what type of person would like those tasks. Then what they were doing is they were collecting together a sort of collection of these tasks. And that was the job. And then they were looking for people that it suited those tasks. But it might have been a task from the accounts department and a task from marketing and a task from operations put into one role because of the nature of those tasks. Do you think we need to start, because there'd be franchisors listening to this, there'd be HR people listening to this, there'd be new business owners listening to this. So do you think, to start changing the way we create a job role and create those roles in a different way to incorporate those soft skills?
I suppose if you were starting from scratch, that may be a way forward, but most people aren't starting from scratch. So we've got roles already existing that have very specific areas of responsibility. And then it's just a matter of finding the sort of personality that would fit that. However, I wanted to touch on something else, Harvey, if you don't mind. The conversation has sort of gone on to the soft skills side of things, and we've sort of left the CV behind. And I can just see people thinking, oh yeah, but okay, well, soft skills is fine, but how do I know they'll be able to do the role, and how do I know whether they can get to the work in time, or how do I know if they've got a degree or whatever? So I just wanted to reassure people that we haven't forgotten about that, but there are much easier ways of identifying those minimum criteria than having to sift through a whole CV looking for that elusive fact. So the way we would suggest doing it is through a very, very simple questionnaire where you're basically asking people to click buttons or tick boxes to identify whether they've got the minimum requirements. And that's about as automated as we get in eTalent. And and they're such simple questions, and they determine whether somebody's got the minimum requirements or not. So, and that's the only time we actually let sort of automation take over. Because if somebody has clearly said they don't have them, then sorry, that's just not.
It's really interesting, and I have brought up our friends from Gather here because I use this gathering information portal that is on your screen right now, and it's really interesting because it's a series of very quick, rapid-fire questions, right, that take under 60 seconds to answer, but could certainly perhaps tick off some of. Oh, I'm throwing my pen about now. Tick off some of those minimum criterias. Are you educated to degree level, and some of these things that somebody doesn't take long to fill out. And then when you're then looking at soft skills after that, or perhaps incorporated in this type of thing, you can. I'm gonna have to get my pen. I need my pen. This is the joy of it being live. No. There it is. Right, I've got it. But yes, you need a good way of identifying. It's a very, very valid point to say you haven't forgotten about this minimum criteria, because the CV is giving a lot of this basic information that you do need to have. It's just how and when we're filtering that is good.
Yeah, but let's not get it from the CV, because especially with AI systems out at the moment, whatever you put in the CV may be used for the wrong reasons by the wrong software. So it's getting the person to actually click a button on the screen as part of their process to answer those questions. It takes them seconds and it saves hours in terms of sifting CVs.
And then I suppose on your software, you've even got the facilities there to be able to sort of then you've through that process of that minimum requirements, and then you can start to sift down there is automation, but the automation has real good value and is trying to filter at the right time, and the right people for the right reasons as well.
Absolutely, and that's the only part where we use automation. After that, after they've done the psychometric assessment, the personality assessment, that is not done by anything automated. A person has to look at that and decide whether their results warrant an interview or whether, unfortunately, they're going to be rejected. We will not use automation for that, because people are far more complicated than that. And it's not as simple as, computer says no. It doesn't work like that.
Absolutely. No, it's very important. It's very important that we've touched on AI and how it's used. It's a tool that's out there, and it's a tool that can be used well.
Have you heard of white text, Harvey?
Yes, this is where you insert a huge amount of words into a CV that a human being can't see, but an AI tool picks up on all of these things, and therefore you get through to the next process. Is this what it?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
That's how you fool AI.
And this is crazy, because this is absolutely happening, and what are you then doing? You're then getting a filtered down number of CVs where the filtering process has added zero value to that.
Yes.
It's just two pieces of software that have come together. You've put a job description, responsibilities, all of these keywords into a thing. All someone's done is put all of that in, and then the AI tool has said that person's good and brought them through. But it's got no value.
It may not be as simple as that, but effectively that's the outcome. Yes.
Absolutely. Let's have a quick look at a few more things that Mara's had to say here. Let's have a look at this one. Do you think that the way you display the information in the resume should become part of the process to determine part of the candidate's soft skills? Okay, so yeah, should we put that in there, and how?
I'm wondering if Mara wants a job as a psychometrician here to help me design the software a bit more. And
well, you never know. You never know. I can absolutely. Let's have a look at her final comment. This is the about me section. Okay, so. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to relate back to the times that I've had to write these things, and you're often put the soft skills right at the end, in your sort of hobbies or
yes.
It's kind of like on the news years ago where they used to sort of end with a kind of a nice or a amusing story. A CV often will end with that, but it's not front and center. There needs to be some reordering of it, doesn't there? At least, what should come first on a CV? That's a good question.
Well, you know my views on the CVs.
Yeah. But again, we've discussed that a CV still has to be there from a point of view of an applicant, perhaps. I mean, at the moment, if we can get employers to a point where they don't need a CV anymore. I know you've done this. You've done this for somebody. You've got a considerably large size customer that doesn't use CVs. Is that right?
Absolutely. In fact, I often get applicants emailing me saying, "Oh, I applied for this role, but there wasn't anywhere to attach a CV, so here it is," and they've deemed it unnecessary to see the CV because all they want is to know whether the person has the soft skills required, and they'll do the training. And if they have those soft skills, they'll work out. And so what they've done in the past is irrelevant. On the other hand, I've had another customer who sort of who said, "Oh, we don't want anybody who's worked in the motor trade before because we don't want them coming to us with bad habits." So it can work in both ways. But this particular customer doesn't want any CVs at all. I think from that point of view, it's actually quite good. It's very impartial.
Yeah, it's really, really refreshing. You make an application, you're taking the assessments, you're truly being then filtered because of skills that are relevant. We talked about they're critical for success. You're being judged at that early point as to whether you've got those skills. And when you're answering these assessment questions, unlike a CV, it's very easy to write some words and those words then to be interpreted. If you're doing a psychometric test and you're doing these types of assessments, it's harder to, I'm not saying people can't, not tell the truth on this, but it's harder, I think, to go through that type of assessment, question after question, because you are going to start to give away who you are within that assessment, aren't you?
Yeah, the questions aren't actually that particularly sort of difficult to answer at all, and there aren't huge numbers. That's one of the benefits of being able to target your assessment is you don't have as many questions, and that means it's easier for people to complete it. But they give the information that we need to know to determine, whether to take them to the next stage. So it's, that's it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. There's a different way to do this. This is the message I think we're putting out there. There's a different way to do it if you're an employer. and there's a different way to do it if you are an employee. And the experience then should become better value for the employer, and should be less heartache for an employee going through the experience of applying for jobs. You
Yeah.
know, less, you're going to, if you know what it is you're good at, you're going to apply for things that are more relevant, and you're going to get a better response rate from that. If then those companies are looking for those things.
They should, as long as those companies are using sort of processes that are appropriate for those types of roles. I I hope that it's going to get better, but I fear that at the moment I don't see that. I see that AI is really the way that people think they should be going, and I don't think that's working particularly well. For either the applicants or the employers.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of experience of trying to help people. I used to do it on a Sunday, trying to help people find new jobs. And, it's a really, really tough experience. And I'm absolutely with you in trying to change this round so that it's a better experience. And, people are staying in their roles longer because they're right for their roles. They're enjoying their work. They're getting on with the people. They fit into the culture. And the reason why, when you look at a lot of jobs, there's a high churn rate, we call it, with franchisees, or the same with employees. If the average length of time an employee's with you is very short, you've got to change something about what you're doing in order to improve that.
And we're constantly striving to help our clients sort of make better decisions and work more smartly, if you like. One of the things we're going to be adding in the next couple of months is a values assessment as a further bit of information to determine whether that person's true interests and values and motivations are going to be satisfied by that particular role, and that in itself should further increase the retention rates using our software.
I mean, that's fantastic, and I know that's something that you want to try and get out there and be a bit more widely used. So, if and when that's ready, you can put some links here in the chat. We can promote that, because if we can get employees, first of all, to start looking at this, right? It's a battle that I'm fighting with you, Nick. But if we can get employees to have a look at this first, and to come on to identify what values are important to them.
Yeah.
I think it's too easy for things like value, culture, mission statements, these sorts of things to sort of slot into a corporate world where they've lost their value, right? Where they've just been put into a PowerPoint presentation. But they're very, very important, and they are what gives longevity for staff. And not just longevity, but where does longevity come from? It comes from if people are feeling good about what it is they do in all sorts of different ways. And to break down the word feeling good, it's complex, and a lot more complex than people think. And it can be easy. It can be very easy if you've got the right tools.
Yeah.
But you need the right tools, and you need the attitude of wanting to improve this, wanting to get better people. When I say better people that are more suited, because they're going to love doing the job.
That's been my driving force for the last 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it continues to be my driving force as well. It's been a really interesting conversation. As ever, these conversations take a different road each time. And, I think the message we're firmly getting out there today is there are different ways to do this. It doesn't have to be the same thing of CVs and the same task of sorting through those and the same heartache of not hearing back. There's another way to do this. There's another way to identify what you're good at. I think a lot of people, I'll often ask the franchisee, why do you want to do this? You know, why coffee shops? And they give us a story about that, and that story is quite valuable, right, as to why they want to do it. But you've got to ask some good questions. You've got to use tools that can really identify these values and these soft skills. And luckily, I know a chap who can help us with that. So it's been really good. We have got to pretty much to the end of the first part of today's chat. I just wanted to read out the last couple of comments from Mara. Mara's put, Nick, I feel you. I'm an organization PSY. I have to create a SAS to identify the franchisee soft skills. So I know your struggle. Oh, well, Mara, we need to catch up because that sounds a fascinating thing you do. And I'm sure you can reach out to Nick as well and share your experiences there. Let's end with that one as well. The CV is like putting up your best dress for a New Year's Eve party. I think that's what we generally miss in the CV is the day-to-day candidate, the way they handle different situations, stress, joy, commitment, etc. Absolutely right. What do you make of that one, Nick?
I'm afraid I still feel the same way about the CV, but I understand what you're saying. Absolutely.
Exactly. It's trying to, whether we call it a CV or what we call it, but it's about how we use this information and what information we're trying to extract, and and it's stuff that's critical for the role. And the last part of that, how you'd handle those situations is absolutely a relevant thing. Look, we have now come to the end of the first part of today's episode. And this is the part of the show where the screen, in my case, will go blank for a little bit because it's now actually illegal to see me without a hat on my head. This is the point where I change it to a very nice looking hat. And of course, this part of the show is brought to you by PJ Murphy and Son, Bespoke British Hatters. And this is Paul Murphy, and he made me this lovely hat. So please reach out to Paul if you would like a hat like this. And he's also a franchisor as well. It's always good to have you with us. So this is the part of the show where we get under the hat of the guest. And we're going to stop talking about CVs and recruitment and franchising right now. And we're going to find out a little bit about Nick. Okay. And we are also going to give Nick an opportunity. Now, Nick has had to face a lot of questions this evening. So he is going to get the opportunity to ask me a question as well. And I don't know what that's going to be in the spirit of things. So look, first of all, Nick, this is just a little bit of fun, this part of the show. But in terms of, I don't know, a claim to fame, a hobby, someone famous you've met, anything like that, can you tell us something like that about you?
A claim to fame. In 1980, 81, I worked in Brussels, and I worked for an American hospital supplies company. And next to us was the European headquarters of IBM.
Okay.
And one day my boss was, he was American, so he obviously had to meet the people from IBM. They were blethering and chatting and whatever. And he said to him, I tell you what, come over here, I'll show you this new thing they've sent over from wherever in the States. And he showed him an IBM PC, the original one with a green screen.
Yeah.
And and my boss said, well, that looks very interesting. Is it any good? And he said, well, I don't know. Why don't you try it? So he gave it to him, and it ended up on my desk. And I think I was the first person in Europe to use an IBM PC because it came directly from IBM next door, and it ended up on my desk. So
wow. I love it. I love it. How was it, the experience of using that then? Was it good?
Well, it was, considering that before that I had a calculator.
Yeah.
I had one of those programmable Hewlett-Packard calculators, because to do complex calculations. And now I had this PC with VisiCalc, and it was that green screen, which was
remember
quite good to work on, but it couldn't do graphics or anything like that. So we had a separate screen for graphics.
It's amazing how we've moved on.
10K of memory or something incredibly small. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
Yeah, about the same as an email now. Incredible, isn't it?
Less than email.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, I love it. Well, look, as I say, in the spirit of things, you don't have to, but you can ask me a question as well, so that I get to be put on the spot here.
Right. So, what was your first job, Harvey?
My first job. Oh, I'm gonna have to think back. What was my first job?
Not as far as I have to think back.
My first job was sweeping the car park of a local pub, and for a number of years it became the steadiest job I had ever had, because I continued doing it for 6 years, from the age of about 11 until I was about 18. And the reason is because I then got a job.
Sweeping, was it?
Sorry?
Wasn't chimney sweeping?
No, I was just cleaning the car park. But then I also got a job like behind the bar, and I got a job as the chef, because I studied to be a chef. But the whole time I still kept my original job for those 6 years. So yes, my first job, sweeping the car park of a pub. For £5, that's what I got paid.
Well, we have to start somewhere on the way to the bar, don't we?
That's it. I wonder if they identified my soft skills for that. They identified my sweeping skills. Anyway, look, fantastic. Let's have a little look at what we've got coming up before we say goodbye tonight. So this Thursday on our sister show, Franchising Brand Stories, we are going to be hearing what's under the hat of Molly Maid. So please join us Thursday at 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. And next Tuesday on the franchise show, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST, we will be joined by the lovely Red Boswell and Robert Zapata. So it's going to be a fantastic show with them. Really looking forward to it. Please join us next week, same time, same place. And until then, have a very good evening. Thank you for being here live. Thank you, Nick, for your time. And we will see you next time. Bye. Cheerio.